I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
How did Starmer manage to make Jeremy Clarkson this mad? Clarkson has become a huge farming advocate and is leading the charge against this Starmer and his gang. His latest attack on Keir Starmer has taken things to a whole new level. Things are about to get much worse for the already struggling Labour Party, and the farmers might just bring them down.
Like a lot of people who live in cities and go on Twitter, I thought farmers drove around in Range Rovers, moaning, until February, and then you all went skiing. And then about 5 years ago, I started farming. And I've come to understand just how unbelievably difficult it is, and complicated, and dangerous, and cold.
Jeremy Clarkson truly feels for these people and actually understands them, unlike Starmer, who's too busy jetting around the world to care about the British working class. Farmers are responsible for one of the most important jobs in a nation, and they are the most underappreciated people. The costs alone of maintaining a farm just so the country has enough good quality produce are way more than you can imagine. Not to forget the equipment and how the government is making things even harder. Can you imagine working in such harsh conditions? No wonder the farmers are outraged, and Jeremy Clarkson is leading the charge against Starmer and his anti-British decisions with some incredibly harsh words.
As we all know, everyone down there, you know a tractor, £200,000 for a medium-sized one. A combine, £500,000. All the equipment costs a fortune. And if you try to price what you're selling to accommodate that, there's just a lot of moaning. You get people saying, well, I shouldn't pay that, I can get a chicken from abroad. Yeah, you can. But it's so full of chlorine, it tastes like a swimming pool with a beak.
£500,000 for a piece of machinery is outrageous by many standards, but it's necessary. Any sensible government would try to make life easier for these farmers by subsidizing these things. Instead, they're bent on making these things even more expensive than they already are. You couldn't even guess how much a tractor costs and how Starmer is robbing these people with tax after tax. Then there's the countless bargaining from consumers who take it all for granted. It's a thankless job, and one without which our groceries would be twice as expensive. Starmer seems to think that farmers are rich, as if they're making huge sums of money, and the reality is staggering. How much more out of touch can this government get?
We have all of this complication and all of this cost, and there's very, very little money in it. Very little money, as you know. And then we got the budget. Now, I know a lot of people all across the country in all walks of life took a bit of a kick on the shin with that budget. You lot got a knee in the nuts.
The budget bombshell that Starmer and Rachel Reeves dropped was enough to make our lives miserable. Now imagine how much worse it is for these farmers. There's no money to be made here, and that's coming from Jeremy himself, who's been farming for quite a while. Clarkson lost his mind when a BBC reporter tried to lie to her face and spread false information, and let's just say he brutally shreds her along with Starmer.
Pickup trucks, double cab pickup trucks, being reclassified as company cars. 211% tax rise there. £50 carbon tax on a bag of fertiliser. The basic farm payments altered in such a way that we're getting a lot less than we thought we were going to get. And then there was the inheritance tax business. Honestly, I don't know where to start. I know.
How bad do things have to be that even Clarkson is at a loss for words? Starmer is trying to make it impossible for the farmers to get the things they need to be productive. Everything from tractors to fertilizers are under threat, but that isn't enough for Sir Keir. Labour is out to completely bankrupt the farmers and force them to sell their lands. That's exactly what this hike in inheritance aims to do. And on top of all that, they have the audacity to downplay the situation by claiming that this won't affect the majority of the farmers.
He was trotting out. Nobody's affected. Rachel Reeves says so. Since when was the BBC the mouthpiece of this infernal government? I've got to get the brakes on. The trouble is I'm off my tits on codeine and paracetamol up here.
Things are not looking good, as major news sources that are supposed to be impartial are now behaving like mouthpieces for the Labour government. Clarkson's not holding back, and he isn't even wrong. Everything he has said about Starmer and his gang is spot on. And now, words aren't enough for Clarkson, and he's making demands. These demands are backed up by every farmer in the nation, and if Starmer doesn't listen, he might see the end of his term sooner than we expected.
But I do want to finish, if I may, with a message to the government. I do. Not a shouty one, it's this. For the sake of everybody here, and for all the farmers who are stuck at home today, paralysed by a fog of despair over what's been foisted upon them, I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake.
Clarkson sure knows how to sugarcoat things. Not only did he make a threatening demand to the government, he did so in such soft words that Starmer won't even know what hit them. Unlike Starmer, Clarkson isn't just all words, he backs it up with action. The state in which he joined the protests had his doctor extremely worried, and rightfully so. But will this make a difference? Labour is being bashed by all sides, but it remains to be seen if they'll listen to the people and back down. The odds are they probably won't, considering their past record of supporting horrible policies.
Today, they're coming at him from all sides on this. A lot of people, including Jeremy Clarkson, saying just admit that you were wrong and back down. Don't think they're going to do that, though, do you?
No, I don't. And I think that it's almost sort of the tragedy in the sense of both sides have dug in, and it's really become a test, I think, of the government's political will, its mettle.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be like that, really, because, frankly, this is not a seismic issue. This isn't like the miners' strike. The authority of the state isn't on the line here.
Starmer thinks he's the only one who's right and everyone else is wrong. Doesn't matter if the entire nation, be it the Tories, Reform UK, the farmers, and even Jeremy Clarkson, all of them are completely humiliating him, but he outright refuses to listen. Is it delusion or just stubbornness? Starmer seems to genuinely believe that his decisions aren't harming the farmers. What is he even gaining from making an enemy out of the farmers? The tax revenues that these hikes bring are laughable.
Same with the farmers. The amounts of money involved are so small compared to what they regard as a £22 billion black hole that it wouldn't keep the NHS afloat for more than a couple of days. Put the pensioners and the farmers' money together, and it's not even 2 days' worth of the NHS.
You got it spot on, and I think, Mike, it's also worth pointing out there's a comparison between both these policies have been kicking around in the Treasury for years. The Treasury loathes, pensioners, and they would love to get rid of the triple lock. The Treasury also is very sceptical about farming land. Don't like really DEFRA.
Starmer seems to be just winging it every step of the way. What are his priorities? Labour claims that there is a supposed £22 billion black hole in the public finances. He goes ahead and freezes the pensioners by cutting their winter fuel allowance. And now he's taxing the farmers into oblivion, all the while wasting money on stupid things like the NHS. None of it makes any logical sense. It's almost as bad as the lies they've told time and time again.
And on rural voters as well. And you had before the election Steve Reed, the DEFRA spokesman, saying there wouldn't be any inheritance tax changes. What do? The very first budget, 4 months in, and they do this. And so it's unsurprising that sense of anger. They hadn't prepared the public for this, and I don't think they've carried the public necessarily on this either.
No, and also just the optics generally of Keir Starmer flying around the world. I mean, even Dan Hodges before.
The Labour Party made a ton of promises and failed to deliver on any of those. It's almost as if they scammed the people by making all of those pledges just to gain votes. Once they won the election, Starmer and his gang made it a personal mission to ruin everything about this nation. While the nation is suffering and the farmers are stressing out, guess what Starmer is doing? He's busy having fancy dates.
You know, the optics of him sort of sitting in a room with Justin Trudeau, sort of date night with Justin Trudeau, glass of beer, some nice comfortable shoes and a possible cardigan or two, sitting there chatting about how great it is to be a modern man, and whether they understand the use of the new, lexicography that's coming out of Gen Z. And it just, Britain is in a bad way, and he's over there in Rio doing what exactly?
This might be the most shameful thing a Prime Minister can do. The country is on the brink of chaos and he's having beer in Canada. The whole thing screams of wrong priorities. And this isn't even a rare occurrence. Starmer has been flying off to multiple countries and is rarely ever in the UK to deal with the brewing issues. Does he think that he can solve everything by avoiding it? Too bad for him, people are catching on and he's being called out on it. Even people who were supposed to be on his side are complaining.
people have said to me, wouldn't it look better for Britain and for Keir Starmer if some of these world leaders were coming to him? I mean, I appreciate, there's a G20 meeting that maybe he has to go to, but he didn't have to go to COP29. He certainly didn't have to take 470 people with him, just to get, a nonsensical, ludicrous pledge about cutting our emissions by 81%, which nobody believes anyway.
Think of all the internal problems we're facing right now. This includes everything from the struggling economy to the farmers that are protesting and demanding Starmer to back down. Now, look at what Starmer is doing. He's wasting everyone's time by attending these useless events about carbon emissions and whatnot. Granted, those things are important in their own right, but there's a time and a place for everything, Sir Keir.
Yeah, exactly right. Because, as I say, it's just not a great look, and even people within, Jason Grove's got a piece in the Mail today, even people within the Labour organisation are now saying, actually, it's starting to cut through. We're starting to hear people complaining about the fact that, Starmer's never here. They basically, don't want him to be away all the time.
I'll tell you why also. It's also Prime Ministers love foreign policy because they can do things quickly, they can pull a lever, they can do a speech, you can cut through. Whereas NHS, big, difficult, hot things take a long, long time.
Is he doing all of this for free brownie points, so he can later flex about how much meaningless stuff he has accomplished compared to the glaring internal flaws that go unchecked? Even people within the Labour Party are beginning to raise questions. Why is Starmer never present? Even when he is, he seems mentally absent, or he just has no clue about what he's doing.
Thousands of farmers are, as we speak, closing in on Westminster to vent their fury over changes to make them start paying inheritance tax on properties worth over £1 million.
And they're going to be joined by one very high-profile farmer, Jeremy Clarkson. He's leaving diddly squats to make his way to Westminster, despite the fact his doctor apparently told him not to do it.
After his heart surgery, he's been told to leave it.
While Starmer seems too scared to even stay in the country, Jeremy Clarkson is rolling up his sleeves and taking a stand. Despite being warned by his doctor to rest after undergoing heart surgery, Clarkson has decided to join the farmers' protest. Starmer could learn a few things about committing to the cause from him. But while Starmer is out, he leaves his ministers to peddle the false narratives. As expected, they're getting owned and Labour can't even damage control anymore.
So the market decides what we get for our products. It doesn't cover costs of production, particularly in recent years with really high input costs. And ultimately, we don't mind paying tax, but if we don't have the cash flow in our business relative to the size of assets, we're really going to struggle.
The problem is one of proportionality. Farmers are not making nearly as much money as Starmer is demanding in taxes. They're barely turning a profit from all the regulated prices and the cost of production. Despite it all, Labour has the audacity to take the high ground. You won't believe how idiotic they sound when trying to defend it.
For us on our farm, as I mentioned the profitability, we do not have the cash in our business to pay for us nearly a £1 million tax bill. And I appreciate that we are being allowed to pay it over 10 years and there is interest on that. And we simply do not have the money there to pay it. The only option for us would be to sell a portion of the farm, which again puts the financial viability at risk.
Bill Remmel, this is the point, isn't it? That we rely on our farmers. We want to produce as much food in this country as possible.
The supposed generosity that Labour has extended to these people is not without terms and conditions. Sure, they can pay the tax over a decade, but at the same time, there's interest being applied on it. Does that sound like a good deal? It's the same as forcing them to sell parts of their lands to pay the inheritance tax. Oh, and they also have to pay capital gains tax if they decide to sell. If that's not cruel, then I don't know what is. No wonder the farmers are furious.
I've got the greatest respect for farmers. They work damned hard and they make a major contribution to society. But I'd really urge farmers to look at the detail of these tax changes, because I genuinely think the reaction has been way out of kilter.
You described it as hysterical.
Yeah, because it's completely...
She's not hysterical.
No, she's not. And I'm not sure you'll be affected in the way that you're describing.
The condescending tone that Labour takes when talking about farmers is insulting to say the least. Burdening them with insane taxes and then saying that they're overreacting. That might as well be the peak of insanity. Did they think that we're stupid? Well, the farmers certainly are not. And in fact, she shreds his argument to bits and pieces, completely humiliating him.
The action from farmers is massively overblown, and they still get a better tax deal than anyone else in society.
Have you worked on a farm? Do you come at this with experience?
Well, when I was a constituency MP, I had 7 farms in my constituency that I worked very hard with and lobbied on their behalf.
But I mean, I wonder if you're better at assessing the value of Rebecca's farm than she is.
Ask yourself, does claiming to be a supporter of farmers make it all right to claim that they're overreacting? And even if you take them at their best, the numbers don't add up. If the farmers have such a better deal, then why are so many of them protesting? That's the sad situation that Britain is in right now. Policymakers who have no idea what they're doing are trying to force everyone to accept their narratives.
Opponent here is the
Opponents
farmer.
across the board,
Yeah.
if they don't agree with this tax, need to say, well, what other taxes should go up?
No, that's
on
not their job.
Hard-working
That's
people.
the Chancellor's job.
that's
I
up
think
to the
we're
Treasury.
hard-working people. I find it completely offensive to not be in the bracket of a hard-working person.
Of course you're hard-working.
Most farmers do not draw minimum wage from their farming businesses. Yes, you might say they get some benefits from being part of a business, and some of those are now going, for example, pickups. But other people in their job perhaps get a company car, holiday allowance, healthcare, a pension, and farmers are not in that position because we do not have the...
For Labour, it's one tax or another. The mask is off and they are revealing their true nature. They never cared about the working class people and all the pledges were just a scam to gain votes. There's no minimum wage or benefits for these farmers the way Labour would want you to believe. It's an incredibly difficult profession and they're rightfully standing up against this tyrannical government.
Story about the farming protest in Westminster, 30 or 40,000 people, has dominated, quite rightly, the news today. Another attack by a government on the back of attacking pensioners, then attacking what? People who have fought for their king and country and are on the streets. Now we're going to turn to the rural community, something that Starmer probably hasn't got a clue about.
Just another normal day for Starmer and his gang. They're going door to door, ruining everyone's lives and taking away any chance of growth or prosperity they might have. There's nothing new or surprising about this. This is how Labour has always operated, and we've seen it plenty of times in the past few months. Even the media is in on the problem, and they tried targeting Clarkson, but it backfired horribly.
One would assume the BBC would be impartial. My backside. Have a listen.
So it's not about you, it's not about your farm and the fact that you bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax?
Classic BBC, that. Classic. Oh, yeah. It's not the fact that I bought a farm to avoid inheritance tax. The fact.
You told the Sunday Times in 2021 that's why you bought it.
These people.
Sorry?
BBC.
It seems that the age of impartial and honest media is long gone. It's all propaganda now. The reporter tried to come up with a gotcha moment by asking a very charged question. Even then, Clarkson managed to play the only winning move, which is to not even attempt to answer their dishonest questions. They should be exposing the truth, but instead they only fuel Labour's delusions. At the heart of this issue is Starmer's misunderstanding of farmers and their assets. This will only hurt small family farms, and this is perhaps the biggest blunder Starmer has made.
This misplaced belief by the Labour Party that if you have a farm, let's make it really simple, that's £1 million worth of value, that you should pay inheritance tax. Well, what I've learned over the last 2 days is A&1, the returns from $1 million are probably 15 or 20 grand a year. A lot of it is an asset that has been passed down from generation to generation, and an absolute majority of these farmers see themselves only as custodians.
Are farmers making millions every year? Well, most of them would have retired by now if they were. Of course, the net revenue from huge farms that have been inherited through generations can exceed that value, but that doesn't account for the expenses they have to pay up. Just on the basis of that assumption alone, Starmer is punishing them with an insane economic burden. He's a wobbly leader with no idea on how to actually run a country.
It was so refreshing to see it, and their case is so clear. This inheritance tax imposition by Labour will hurt small family farms. It will make it impossible for them to be custodians in the way they have been for so long. That's really damaging, and it shows, I think, out of all the aloof and clueless things this government has done, this might well be the worst.
Starmer has earned yet another nickname of the farmer harmer, and it's only going to get worse. He'll only ruin the family farms, and as a result, more and more rich corporations will buy off the land. Can you imagine the consequences of that? The prices will skyrocket as supply will drop. Starmer is making an enemy out of the nation's farmers, and things will not end well for him.
You can always tell when Starmer is wobbling and feeling unsure because he sounds even more robotic than normal, and he did in that clip. But, you know, it just shows how out of touch this government is, because he talks about the inheritance tax on farms. He says it's still less than the inheritance tax that other people pay. That is technically true. Inheritance tax is a pain in the neck for everyone, but farms are different kinds of places. These are places where they make food that keep people alive.
Farmers technically do have to pay less inheritance tax than usual, but that doesn't make it any less horrible. These people are the backbone of our country, and they deserve special exemptions so that we can boost our local production and rely less on imports.
You do not want to make an enemy of the nation's farmers. No. I mean, you know, someone needs to say in Starmer's ear, listen, we can't be at war with farmers. We can't be in government for 4 or 5 months and already be at war with the people who make the food for this country. It is psychotic. It is completely deranged. I think at some point they probably will have to backtrack or water it down in some way.
Starmer's advisors have messed up. They failed to stop him from making such horrible decisions, and he might be forced to resign over it. The farmers will not back down, and sooner or later, the government will budge. They will backtrack and might even reverse this cruel policy altogether. In this time of need, the farmers need your support. Help their voice be heard by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.